quiet of the evening, where shadows softly play. A fairy tale wolf sheds his skin, gently drifting away, with a twinkle in his eye and a heart full of dreams. He waits for the Friday night glow, where the magic redeems. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. He picks up a book, the pages worn and wise, every line a whisper under the vast skies, from far off lands where the wild things roam, to enchanted forests where the heart finds home. Oh, the wolf in the moonlight, he's found his true call, reading tales of wonder for one and for all. In a world of stars dancing, his spirit takes flight, with stories of beauty under the starlit night. With every word he reads, he casts a spell of peace, transporting all who listen to a land where joy won't cease. For in these fairy tales, amidst the laughter and tears, the wolf finds his solace, he conquers his fears. As the night grows deeper, he serenades the moon with melodies that linger, a soft and soothing tune. In this sacred hour, where magic abounds, the fairy tale wolf writes love into sound.
Well, sure, as soon as my microphone goes on, I start coughing. But anyway, hey, Guilty. Congrats on getting first. I'm just noticing that my follow has gone up. Guess it helps not to advertise. That's kind of the same way I ended up getting affiliate, is I just didn't stream for a while and came back and had the average. Now I take a day off, and suddenly I'm at 463. How you doing, Guilty? Getting ready for work? Cool. I gotta earn that money. I certainly don't. Wish I could, but no one wants to hire fairy tale wolves, apparently. And even my psychiatrist told me I should get a job, which I think is just funny. But seeing as streaming seems to be my only purpose in life anymore, I'm trying to do it better. I'm trying to do it more often. And I'm actually kind of surprised. When I went back to my old settings on OBS, it's still broadcasting at 1080. Pretty sure I am, anyway. And on top of that, my captions started working again, which they'd closed, well, they'd stopped doing when I had did the last OBS update. Now, I don't know if anyone's actually noticed, but when I do the book links, well, the streams, I will put a link to where you can buy the book. Oddly enough, it's my link for Grey Wolf and Magical Books, with the link of being able to buy the book. And for some reason, bookshop.org has book 1 and book 2 of mine, well, book 1 and 3 of mine, but it doesn't have book 2, which I thought was just kind of weird. But I also have book lists on the website of other authors that I actually know and talk to. So I've got their books listed on one of my lists. So, yeah. Let's see, I can't even remember what all I have on my site. But it's my bookshop.org one. It's... I mean, I've got the link down below. And, you know, that's... I get a minor cut, and I buy books through them, too. Kind of wish Thrift Books hadn't canceled my affiliation, but I wasn't driving enough traffic to them. Apparently I wasn't for Amazon either. But I guess it's more because they're using third-party affiliate sites, because they're run by CJ, and... well, Amazon has its own affiliate program, but Thrift Books and Barnes & Noble and Books A Million go through different companies to do their affiliate purchases, and, well, I'm just not meeting their goals. It's hard to sell books when I can't get people to go there. But I've been putting the links for the books. I've been trying to go back and add the links for all the books that I've read. In fact, on my bookstore.org, I have a list, well, 2 lists going of books that I have narrated. Both the ones I do on stream and the ones that I've done off stream, if they're even available. One book I can't even find a record of anymore, and it's, I think, the 3rd or 4th fairy tale book I read that was just called Stories I Like. I've got the playlist over on my YouTube channel, but the book, I can't find any trace of it anywhere, and I have a physical copy. So I don't know how I'm going to find another one of those. Of course, I'm tempted to see if I can get permission to do a reprint of another book that is actually about someone I'm related to. But it was just a small printing house, so I don't know how many were actually made. But it's The Grave... no, it's Bird Atkins at the corner of Dead Man's Lane, I think. I mean, how many people can say that they were buried alive and were dug back out, and he kept the tombstone? He actually took his grave marker and put it in front of his house. And this is a guy I'm related to. I've got a lot of immortal people in my family. I've had one that was hung for horse thievery, which I may or may not be named after. We do share the same birthday. And then we've got this one who was supposedly killed in a fight and survived. Then there's my own folklore, which is just out there anyway. Someday I will get it finished and publish it. But that would involve me actually focusing on writing it. But anyway, as I said, we are running late. Let me fix this thing if I can. Okay. Okay. Twitch is still processing the uploaded video, so. But all my streams from yesterday are now public, because I had them released at 9. Okay, and get back to today, and we'll go over to fairy tales. Okay. Got the fireplace sound going. That's the one without ads. My microphone's working. I didn't put any butter out for the fairies, but I do have the sparkly drink and the lights, so hopefully they won't disturb things too much. But as it is Friday night, and we do fairy tales, do fairy tales on Friday nights. There's a rock and roll in chat. But anyway, our first wonderful story for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. Not really a fairy tale, but a folk tale, because there's no fairies involved, but there is a story about the fox and the wolf. At the foot of some high mountains there was, once upon a time, a small village, and a little way off 2 roads met, one of them going to the east and the other to the west. The villagers were quiet, hard-working folk who toiled in the fields all day, and in the evening set out for home when the bell began to ring in the little church. In the summer mornings they led out their flocks to pasture, and were happy and contented from sunrise to sunset. One summer night, when the round moon shone down on the white road, a great wolf came trotting around the corner. "I must positively get a good meal before I go back to my den," he said to himself. "It is nearly a week since I have tasted anything but scraps, though perhaps no one would think it to look at my figure. Of course, there are plenty of rabbits and hares in the mountains, but indeed one needs to be a greyhound to catch them, and I'm not so young as I was. If I could only dine off that fox I saw a fortnight ago, curled up into a delicious hairy ball, I should ask nothing better. I would have eaten her then, but unluckily her husband was lying beside her, and one knows that foxes, great and small, run like the wind. Really, it seems as if there was not a living creature left for me to prey upon, but a wolf, and, as the proverb says, one wolf does not bite another. However, let us see what this village can produce. I am as hungry as a schoolmaster." Now, while these thoughts were running through the mind of the wolf, the very fox he had been thinking of was galloping along the other road. "The whole day I sit, I've listened to those village hens clucking till I could bear it no longer," murmured she as she bounded along, hardly seeming to touch the ground. "When you are fond of fowls and eggs, it is the sweetest of all music. As sure as there is sun in the heaven, I will have gotten them some this night. For I've grown so thin that my very bones rattle, and my poor babies are crying for food." And as she spoke, she reached a little green plot of grass, where the 2 roads joined, and flung herself under the tree to take a little rest and to settle her plans. At this moment the wolf came up. At the sight of the fox lying within grasp, his mouth began to water, but his joy was somewhat checked when he noticed how thin she was. The fox's quick ears heard the sound of his paws, though they were soft as velvet, and turning her head, she said politely, "Is that you, neighbor? What a strange place to meet in. I hope you are quite well." "Quite well as regards my health," answered the wolf, whose eyes glistened greedily. "At least, as well as one can be when one is very hungry. But what is the matter with you? A fortnight ago you were as plump as heart could wish."
"I've been ill, very ill," replied the fox, "and what you say is quite true. A worm is fat in comparison to me."
"He is. Still, you are good enough for me, for to the hungry no bread is hard."
"Oh, you're joking. I'm sure you're not half as hungry as I am."
"That we shall soon see," cried the wolf, opening his huge mouth and crouching for a spring.
"Well, what are you doing?"
exclaimed the fox, stepping backwards. "What am I doing? What I am going to do is make my supper off of you in less time than a crow. Yeah. What I am doing is to make my supper off of you in less time than a cock takes to crow."
"Oh, surely you must have your joke,"
answered the fox lightly, but never removing her eye from the wolf, who simply snarled in return, showing all his teeth. "I don't want to choke, but to eat." "Yes, Salty?"
"But the only person of your talents must perceive that you might eat me to the very last morsel, and never know that you had swallowed anything at all."
"In this world, the cleverest people are always the hungriest," replied the wolf.
How true that is, but
"I can't stop to listen to your buts and yets," broke in the wolf rudely. "Let us get to the point, and the point is that I want to eat you and not talk to you."
have you no pity for a poor mother?"
asked the fox, putting her tail to her eyes and weeping slyly out of them all the same. "I am dying of hunger," answered the wolf doggedly. "And you know," he added with a grin, "that charity begins at home."
"Quite so," replied the fox. "It would be unreasonable of me to object to your satisfying your appetite at my expense. But if the fox resigns herself to sacrifice, the mother offers you one last request."
"Then be quick and don't waste my time, for I can't wait much longer. What is it that you want?"
"You must know," said the fox, "that in this village there is a rich man who makes in the summer enough cheeses to last him the whole year, and keeps them in an old well, now dry in his courtyard. By the well hang two buckets on a pole that were used in former days to draw up the water. For many nights I have crept down to the palace, and have lowered myself to the buckets, bringing home with me enough cheese to feed my children. I beg you is to come with me. Instead of hunting chickens and such things, I will make a good meal off cheese before I die."
"But the cheeses may all be finished by now."
"If you were only to see the quantities of them," laughed the fox, "and even if they are finished, there would always be me to eat."
"Well, I will come. Lead the way. But I warn you that if you try to escape or play any tricks, you are reckoning without your host. That is to say, without any legs, which are as long as yours." All was silent in the village, and not a light was to be seen but that of the moon, which shone bright and clear in the sky. The wolf and the fox crept softly along, when suddenly they stopped and looked at each other. A savory smell of frying bacon reached their noses, and reached the noses of the sleepy dogs, who began to bark greedily. "Is it safe to go on, you think?" asked the wolf in a whisper, and the fox shook her head.
"Not while the dogs are barking," she said. "Someone might come out to see if there's anything that's the matter."
And she signed to the wolf to curl himself up in the shadow beside her. Thank you for the hydrate. In about half an hour, In about half an hour, the dogs grew tired of barking, or perhaps the bacon was eaten up, and there was no smell to excite them. Then the wolf and the fox jumped up and hastened to the foot of the wall.
I'm lighter than he is, thought the fox to herself, and perhaps if I make haste I can get a start and jump over the wall on the other side before he manages to spring over this one.
And she quickened her pace, but if the wolf could not run, he could jump, and with one bound he was beside his companion. "What were you going to do, comrade?"
Oh, nothing,
replied the fox, much vexed at the failure of her plan. "I think if I were to take a bit of your haunch, you would jump better," said the wolf, giving a snap as they spoke. The fox drew back uneasily.
Be careful, I shall scream,
she snarled. And the wolf, understanding all that might happen if the fox carried out her threat, the signal to the companion to leap on the wall, where he immediately followed her. Once on top, they crouched down and looked about them. Not a creature was to be seen in the courtyard, and in the farthest corner from the house stood the well, with its 2 buckets suspended from a pole, just as the fox had described it. The 2 thieves dragged themselves noiselessly along the wall until they were opposite the well, and by stretching out their necks as far as they could go, the fox was able to make out that there was very little water at the bottom, but just enough to reflect the big moon, round and yellow.
How lucky, she cried to the wolf. There's a huge cheese the size of a mill wheel. Look, look, did you ever see anything so beautiful?
Never, answered the wolf, peering over in his turn, his eyes glistening greedily, for he imagined that the moon's reflection in the water was really a cheese.
And now, unbeliever, what have you to say?
Said the fox, and she laughed gently. That you're a fox, of your word, replied the wolf.
Well, then go down in that bucket and eat your fill, said the fox.
Oh, is that your game? Asked the wolf with a grin. No, no, the person who goes down in the bucket will be you, and if you don't get down, your head will go without you.
Of course I will go down, with the greatest pleasure, answered the fox,
who had expected the wolf's reply. And be sure you don't eat all the cheese, or it will be worse for you, continued the wolf. But the fox looked at him with tears in her eyes.
Farewell, suspicious one, she said sadly,
and climbed into the bucket. In an instant she had reached the bottom of the well, and found that the water was not deep enough to cover her legs.
Why, it is larger and richer than I thought,
cried the wolf. She cried, turning her towards Wolf, who was leaning over the wall of the well. Then be quick and bring it up, commanded the wolf.
How can I when it weighs more than I do?
Asked the fox. If it is heavy, bring it in 2 bits, of course, said he.
But I have no knife, answered the fox. You have to come down yourself, and we will carry it up between us.
And how am I to come down? Inquired the wolf.
Oh, you really are very stupid. Get into the other bucket that is nearly over your head.
The wolf looked up and saw the bucket hanging there, and with some difficulty he climbed into it. As he weighed at least 4 times as much as the wolf in the bucket, went down with a jerk, and the other bucket, in which the wolf was seated, came to the surface. As soon as he understood what was happening, the wolf began to speak like an angry wolf, but was little comforted when he remembered that the cheese still remained to him. But where's the cheese? He asked of the fox, who in turn was leaning over the parapet, watching the proceedings with a smile.
The cheese?
Asked the wolf.
Answered the fox. Why, I'm taking it home to my babies, who are too young to get food for themselves.
A traitor! Cried the wolf, growling with age. But the fox was not there to hear his insult, for she had gone off to a neighboring fowl house, where she had noticed some fat young chickens the day before.
Perhaps I did treat him rather badly, she said to herself. But it seems getting cloudy, and if there's a heavy rain, the other bucket will fill and sink to the bottom, and his will go up. At least it may.
Ever wonder why wolves don't trust foxes? Now you know. Okay, this one looks to be of Scotland. So the names will be fun to pronounce. So our next tale for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. How Ian Direach got the Blue Falcon. Long ago, a king and queen ruled over the islands of the west, and they had one son, whom they loved dearly. The boy grew up to be tall, strong, and handsome, and he could run and shoot and swim and dive better than any lad his own age in the country. Besides, he knew how to sail about and sing songs on the harp, and during the winter evenings, when everyone was gathered round the huge hall fire shaping bows or weaving cloth, Ian Direach would tell them tales and the deeds of his fathers. So the time slipped by till Ian was almost a man, as they reckoned men in those days, and then his mother, the queen, died. There was a great mourning throughout all the isles, and the boy and his father mourned her bitterly also. But before the new year came, the king had married another wife, and seemed to have forgotten his old one. Only Ian remembered. On a Monday, when the leaves were yellow in the trees of the glen, Ian slung his bow over his shoulder, and filling his quiver with arrows, went on the hill in search of game. But not a bird was to be seen anywhere, till at length the blue falcon flew past him, and raising his bow he took aim at her. His eye was straight and his hand steady, but the falcon's wing was swift, and he only shot a feather from her wing. As the sun was now low over the sea, he put the feather in his game bag and set out homewards.
"Have you brought me much game today?"
asked his stepmother as he entered the hall. Naught save this, he answered, handing her the feather of the blue falcon, which she held by the tip and gazed at silently. Then she turned to Ian and said,
"I am setting it on all the crosses and spells as the fall of the year, that you may always be cold and wet and dirty, and that your shoes may never have pools in them."
Okay, I'm saying all this wrong.
"I'm setting it on you as crosses and spells, and the fall of the year, that you may always be cold and wet and dirty, and that your shoes may ever have pools in them, till you bring me hither the blue falcon on which that feather grew."
"If it dispels your lang, I can lay them too," answered Ian Direach. "And you shall stand with one foot on the great house and another in the castle till I come back, and your face shall be to the wind, from wherever it shall blow." Then he went away to seek the bird, as his stepmother bade him, and, looking homewards to the hill, he saw the queen standing with one foot on the great house and the other on the castle, and her face turned wherever the tempest should blow. On journeying over hills and through rivers, he reached a wide plain, and never a glimpse did he catch of the falcon. Darker and darker it grew, and the small birds were seeking their nests, and at length Ian Direach could see no more, and he lay down under some bushes, and sleep came to him. And in his dream a soft nose touched him, and a warm body curled up beside him, and a low voice whispered to him,
"Fortune is against you, Ian Direach. I have but the cheek and the hoof of a sheep to give you, and with these you must be content."
With that, Ian Direach awoke and beheld Gilliam Ayrton the fox. Between them they kindled a fire and ate their supper. Then Gilliam Ayrton the fox bade Ian Direach lie down as before and sleep till morning. And in the morning when he awoke, Gilliam Ayrton said,
"The falcon that you seek is in the keeping of the giant of 5 heads, and with 5 necks and 5 humps. I will show you the way to his house, and counsel you to do his bidding, nimbly and cheerfully, and, above all, to treat his birds kindly, for in this manner he may give you his falcon to feed and care for. And when this happens, wait till the giant is out of his house, and throw a cloth over the falcon, and bear her away with you. Only see that not one of her feathers touches anything within the house. or evil will befall you.
I thank you for your counsel, spake Direach, and I will be careful to follow it. And he took the path to the giant's house. Who is there? Cried the giant. Who is there? Cried the giant, as someone knocked loudly on the door of his house. One who seeks to work as a servant, answered Dan McGurk. And what can you do? Asked the giant again. I can feed birds and tend pigs, I can feed and milk a cow, and also goats and sheep, if you have any of these, replied Direach. Then enter, for I have a great need of such an own, said the giant. So Direach entered, and tended so well and carefully all the birds and beasts that the giant was better satisfied than he ever had been, and at length he thought that he might have been trusted to feed the falcon. And the heart of Ian was glad, and he tended the blue falcon till his feathers shone like the sky, and the giant was well pleased. And one day he said to him, For long my brothers on the other side of the mountain have besought me to visit them, but never could I go in fear for my falcon. Now I think I can leave her with you for one day. Before nightfall I shall be back again. Scarcely was the giant out of sight next morning when Direach seized the falcon, and throwing a cloth over her head, hastened with her to the door. But the rays of the sun pierced through the darkness of the cloth, and as they passed the doorpost she gave a spring, and the tip of one of her feathers touched the post, which gave a scream, and brought the giant back in 3 strides. Direach trembled as he saw him, but the giant only said, If you wish for my falcon, you must first bring me the white sword of light that is in the house of big women of Direach. And where do they live? Asked Ian, but the giant answered, that is for you to discover. And Ian dared say no more, and hastened down to the waste. There he hoped to meet his friend Gil Martin, the fox, who bade him eat supper and lie down to sleep. When he had wakened next morning, the fox said to him, Let us go down to the shore of the sea, and to the shore of the sea they went. And after they had reached the shore, and beheld the sea stretching out before them, and the isle of Direach in the midst of it, the soul of Ian sank, and he turned to Gilly Meriton, and asked why he had brought him there, for the giant, when he had been sent to him, had known full well that without a boat he could never find the big women. Do not be cast down, answered the fox. It is quite easy. I will change myself into a boat, and you shall go on board me, and I will carry you over the sea to the 7 big women of Direach. Tell them that you are skilled in brighting silver and gold, and in the end they will take you as a servant, and if you are careful to please them, they will give you the white sword of light to make bright and shining. But when you seek to steal it, take heed that its sheath touches nothing inside the house, or ill will befall you. So Direach did all the things as the fox had told him, and the 7 big women of Direach took him as a servant, and for 6 weeks he worked so hard for that his 7 mistresses said to each other, Never has a servant had the skill to make all bright and shining like this one. Let us give him the white sword of light to polish like the rest. Then they brought forth the white sword of light from the iron closet where it hung, and bade him rub it till he could see his face in the shining blade, and he did so. But one day, when the 7 big women were all out of the way, it bethought him that the moment had come for him to carry off the sword, and replacing it on the sheath, he hoisted it on his shoulder. But just as he was passing the door, the tip of the sheath touched it, and the door gave a loud shriek. And the big women heard it, and came back running, and took the sword from him, and said, If our sword is what you want, you must first bring us the bay colt of the king of Erin. Humbled and ashamed, Direach left the house, and sat by the side of the sea, and soon Gilly Meriton the fox came to him. Plainly I see you have taken no heed of my words, Direach, said the fox. But eat first, and yet once more I will help you." With these words, the heart returned to Ian Derlick, and he gathered sticks and made a fire, and ate with Gilly Merton the fox, and slept on the sand. At dawn the next morning, Gilly Merton said to Ian Derlick, "I will change myself into a ship, and I will bear you across the seas to Erin, where the land where dwells the king. And you shall offer yourself as a serve at his table, and tend to his horses, till at length so well content is he that he gives you the bay colt to wash and to brush. But when you run away with her, see that not except the soles of her hoofs touch anything within the palace gates, or it will go ill with you." After he had thus counselled in Derrick, the fox changed himself into a ship, and set sail for Erin. And the king of that country gave into Ian Derrick's hands the care of his horses, and never before did their skins shine so brightly, nor was their pace so swift. And the king was well pleased, and at the end of the month he sent for Ian, and said to him, "You have given me faithful service, and now I will entrust you to the most precious thing that my kingdom holds." And when he had spoken, he led Ian Derrick to the stable where stood his bay colt. And Ian rubbed her, and fed her, and galloped with her all around the country till he could have one wind behind him, and catch the other which was in front. "I am going away to hunt," said the king one morning, while he was watching Ian tend the bay colt in her stable. "The deer have come down from the hill, and it is time for me to give them chase." Then he went away, and when he was no longer in sight, Ian Derrick led the bay colt out of the stable, and sprang on her back. But as they rode through the gate, which stood between the palace and the outer world, the colt switched her tail against the post, which shrieked loudly. In a moment the king came running up, and seized the colt's bridle. "If you want my bay colt, you must first bring me the daughter of the king of the Franks." With slow steps went Ian Derrick down to the shore, where Gilly Merton the fox awaited him. "Plainly, I see you have not done as I bid you, nor will you ever do it," spoke Gilly Merton. "But I will help you again. For the third time I will change myself into a ship, and we set sail to France." And to France they sailed, and as he was on the ship, and Gilly Merton sailed where he would, he ran himself into a cleft in the rock, high on the land. Then he commanded Ian Derrick to go up to the king's palace, and say that he had wrecked, and that his ship was made fast in the rock, and that none had saved him but himself only. Ian Derrick listened to the words of the fox, and he told the tale so pitiful that the king and queen, and their daughter the princess, all came out to hear it. And when they heard it, naught would be pleased them except to go down to the shore and visit the ship, which by now was floating, as the tide was up. Torn and battered as if she had passed through many dangers, yet music of wondrous sweetness poured forth within. "Bring hither the boat," cried the princess, "that I may go see for myself the heart that gives forth such music." And a boat was brought, and Ian Derrick stepped in to row it to the side of the ship. To the further side he rowed, that none could see, and when he helped the princess on board, he gave a push to the boat, so that she could not get back in it again. The music sounded sweeter, though they always could never see from whence it came, and sought it from one part of the vessel to another. When they at last reached the deck and looked around them, naught of the land could they see, or anything save the rushing waters. The princess stood silent, and her face grew grim. At last she said, "An ill trick you have played on me. What is this that you have done, and whither are we going?" "It is a queen you will be," answered Ian Derrick, "for the king of Erin has sent me for you, and in return he will give me a big colt, that I may take him to the big 7 women of Direach in exchange for the white sword of light. This I must carry to the giant of the 5 heads, 5 necks, and 5 humps, and in place of it he will bestow upon me the blue falcon, which I have promised my stepmother, so that she may free me from the spell which she has laid upon me." "I would rather be wife to you," answered the princess. By and by the ship sailed into harbor on the coast of Erin, and cast anchor there. Gilliam Martin, the fox, bade Eric tell the princess that she must either bide yet a while in a cave amongst the rocks, for they had business on land, and after a while they would return for her. Then they took the boat and rowed up the rocks, and as they touched the land, Gilliam changed himself into a fair woman, who laughed, and said to Ian Derrick, "I will give the king a fine wife." Now the king of Erin had been hunting on the hill, and when he saw the strange ship sailing towards the harbor, he guessed that it might be Ian Derrick, and left his hunting and ran down the hill to the stable. Hastily he led the bay colt from the stall, and put the golden saddle on her back, and the silver bridle over her head, and with the colt's bridle in his hand, he hurried to meet the princess. "I've brought you the king of France's daughter," said Ian Derrick. And the king of Erin looked at the maiden, and was well pleased, not knowing that it was really Gael Martin the fox. And he bowed low, and besought her to do him the honour to enter the palace. And Gilliam Martin, as he went in, turned to look back at Ian Derrick and laughed. In the great hall the king paused and pointed to an iron chest which stood in the corner. "In that chest is a crown that has waited for you for many years," he said, "and at last you have come for it." He stooped down to unlock the box. In an instant, Gilliam Martin the fox had sprung on his back and gave him such a bite that he fell down unconscious. Quickly the fox took his own shape again and galloped away to the seashore, where Ian Derrick and the princess and the bay colt awaited him. "I will become a ship," cried Gilliam Martin, "and you shall go aboard me." And so he did, and Ian Derrick led the bay colt to the ship, and the princess went after them, and they set sail for Dahura. The wind was behind them, and very soon they saw the rocks of Dahura in front. Then spoke Gilliam Martin the fox. "Let the bay colt and the king's daughter hide in these rocks, and I will change myself into the colt, and go with you to the house of the 7 big women." Joy filled the hearts of the big women when they beheld the bay colt, and led up to the door by Ian Derrick. And the youngest of them fetched the white sword of light, and gave it into the hands of Ian Derrick, who took off the golden saddle and silver bridle, and went down the hill with the sword to place where the princess and the real colt awaited him. "Now we shall have the ride we have long waited for," cried the 7 big women, and they saddled and bridled the colt, and the eldest one got upon the saddle. Then the second sister sat on the back of the first, and the third on the back of the second, and so on until the whole 7. And when they were all seated, the eldest struck her side with the whip, and the colt bounded forward. Over the moors she flew, and round the mountains, and still the big women clung to her and snorted with pleasure. At last she leapt high in the air, and came down upon the moldeth of the great hill, where the crag is, and she rested her sore feet on the crag, and threw up her hind legs, and the 7 big women fell over the crag, and were dead when they reached the bottom. And the colt laughed, and became a fox again, and galloped away to the seashore, where Ian Derrick, the princess, the real colt, and the white sword of light were awaiting him. "I will make myself into a ship," said Gilliam Martin the fox, "and will carry you and the princess and the bay colt and the white sword of light back to the land." And when the shore was reached, Gilliam Martin the fox took back his own shape, and spoke to Ian Derrick in the wise. "Let the princess and the white sword of light and the bay colt remain among the rocks. I will change myself into the likeness of the white sword of light, so that you can bear me to the giant, and instead he will give you the blue falcon." And Ian Derrick did as the fox bade him, and set out for the giant's castle. From afar the giant beheld the blaze of the white sword of light, and his heart rejoiced. And he took the blue falcon, and put it in a basket, and gave it to Ian Derrick, who bore it swiftly away to the place where the princess and the bay colt and the real sword of light were waiting him. So well contented was the giant to possess the sword that he had coveted for so many years, that he began at once to whirl it through the air, to cut and to slash with it. For a little while, Gilliam Martin let the giant play with him in this manner. Then he turned to the giant's head, and cut through the 5 necks, so that the 5 heads rolled on the ground. Afterward he went back to Ian Derrick and said to him,
Saddle the colt with the golden saddle, and bridle with the silver bridle. Sling the basket of the falcon over your shoulders, and hold the white sword of light with their back to your nose. Then mount the colt, and let the princess mount behind you, and thus travel to your father's palace. But see that the back of the sword is never used against your nose, else when your stepmother beholds you, she will change you into a dry faggot. If, however, you do as I bid, she will become herself a bundle of sticks." Direach hearkened with these words to Gillimartin, and his stepmother fell as a bundle of sticks before him, and he set fire to her, and was free for ever from her spells. After that he married the princess, who was the best wife in all the islands of the west. Henceforth he was safe from harm, for he had not only the bay colt, who could leave one wind behind and catch the next, and the blue falcon to bring him game to eat, and the white sword of light to pierce through all his foes. And Direach knew that all this he owed to Gillimartin the fox, and he made a compact with him that he might choose the beasts out of his herds whenever hunger seized him, and henceforth no arrow should be let fly at him or any other of his race. But Gillimartin the fox would take no reward for the help he had given Direach, only his friendship. Thus all things prospered with Direach until he died. And no, Guilty, I do not know where the island of the Big Seven Women are. I could probably find it on a map if I tried hard enough. If I tried hard enough. 16 minutes. How long is the next story? The Ugly Duckling. If it comes to it, I'll pause ads for a bit. Because, oddly enough, this story is mentioned in Dracula. No, it's not Dracula. No, it is. Hans Christian Andersen is actually mentioned in Dracula. And this story specifically, which I find greatly amusing, because it's actually Van Helsing who mentioned his friend Hans Andersen and his story of the Ugly Duckling. So, okay, to get to the island of the Big Seven Women, you would have to travel east from the islands neighboring Scotland. There's a cluster of smaller islands, and the island of the Big Seven Women is between that and Ireland. Just letting you know. I'm not sure if there's any more big women there, though. Death by Snoo. Anyway. That poor horse, it had 7 of them on its back. The fact that they were stacking themselves on each other, that was kind of weird. But damn. Anyway, our next story for this fabulous Friday Night of Fairy Tales: The Ugly Duckling. It was summer in the land of Denmark, and though for most of the year the country looks flat and ugly, it was beautiful now. The wheat was yellow, and the oats were green, and the hay was dry and delicious to roll in, and from the old ruined house, which nobody lived in, down to the edge of the canal was a forest of great burdocks, so tall that a family of children might have dwelt in them and never have been found out. It was under these burdocks that a duck had built herself a warm nest, and was not sitting all day on 6 pretty eggs. 5 of them are white, but the 6th, which was larger than the others, was an ugly gray color. The duck had always puzzled about that egg, and how it became so different from the rest. Other birds might have thought that when the duck went down in the morning and the evening to water and stretch her legs, some lazy mother might have seen the watch and popped her egg into the nest. But ducks are not clever at all, and are not quick at counting, so this duck did not worry herself about the matter, and just took care of the big egg should be as warm as the rest. This was the first set of eggs that the duck had ever laid,
and to begin with, she was very pleased and proud, and laughed at all the others who were always neglecting their duties to gossip with each other, so now take little extra swims besides the two in the morning and evening that were necessary for health. But at length she grew tired of sitting there all day. "Surely eggs take longer than this to hatch," she said to herself, and so she pined for a little amusement also. Still, she knew that if she left her eggs, and the ducklings were in them to die soon, her friends would never speak to her again. So there she stayed, only getting off the eggs several times a day to see if the shells were cracking, which may have been the very reason why they did not crack sooner. She had looked at the eggs at least 150 times, when to her joy she saw tiny cracks on two of them, and scrambling back to her nest she drew the eggs closer to one another, and never moved for the whole day. The next morning she was rewarded by noticing the cracks in the whole 5 eggs, and in the midday 2 little heads were poking out of the shells. This encouraged her so much that after breaking the shells with her bill, so that the little creatures could get free of them, she sat steadily for a whole night upon the rest, and before the sun rose the 5 white eggs were empty, and 10 pairs of eyes were gazing out upon the green world. Now the duck had been very carefully brought up, and did not like dirt. And besides, the broken shells are not the most comfortable things to sit on upon walking, so she pushed the rest out over the side, and felt delighted to have some company to talk to till the big egg hatched. But day after day went on, and the big egg showed no signs of cracking, and the duck grew more and more impatient. She began to wish to consult her husband, who never came. "I can't think of what is the matter with it," the duck grumbled to her neighbor, who had called to pay her a visit. "Why, I could have hatched 2 broods in the time that this one has taken." "Let me look at it," said the old neighbor. "I thought so. It is a turkey's egg. Once when I was young, they tricked me into sitting on a brood of the turkey's eggs myself, and when they hatched, the creatures were so stupid that nothing would make them learn to swim. I have no patience when I think of it." "Well, I will give it another chance," said the duck, "and if it does not come out of its shell in another 24 hours, I will just leave it alone and teach the rest of them to swim properly, to find their own food. I can't really be expected to do 2 things at once." And with a fluff of her feathers, she pushed the egg to the middle of the nest. All through the next day she sat on, giving up even her morning bath for the fear that the blast of cold might strike the big egg. In the evening, when she ventured to peep, she thought she saw a tiny crack on the upper part of the shell. Filled with hope, she went back to her duties, though she could hardly sleep all night for the excitement. When she woke with the first streaks of light, she felt something stirring under her. Yes, there it was at last, and she moved. A big, awkward bird tumbled head foremost on the ground. There was no denying it was ugly, and even the mother was forced to admit that to herself, though she only said it was large and strong. "You don't need any teaching when once you're in the water," she said at him with a glance. Try this again. "You won't need any teaching when you're once in the water," she told him, with a glance of surprise at the dull brown which covered his back, and his long, naked neck. And indeed he did not, though he was not half so pretty to look at as the yellow balls of fluff that followed her. When they returned, they found the old neighbor on the bank, waiting for them to take them into the duckyard. "No, it is not a young turkey, certainly," whispered she in confidence to the mother. "For though it is lean and skinny, and has no color to speak of, yet there is something rather distinguished about it, and it holds its head up well." "It is very kind of you to say so," said the mother, who by this time had some secret doubts of its loveliness. "Of course, when you see it by itself it is right, though it is different, somehow, from the others, but one cannot expect all of one's children to be beautiful." By this time they had reached the center of the yard, where a very old duck was sitting, who was treated with great respect by all the fowls present. "You must go up and bow low before her," whispered the mother to her children, nodding her head in the direction of the old lady, "and keep your legs well apart as you do see me.
No well-bred duckling turns in his toes. It is a sign of common parents.
The little ducks tried hard to fill their fat little bodies and occupy the movements of their mother, and the old lady was quite pleased with them. But the rest of the ducks looked on discontentedly and said to each other,
"Oh, dear me, here are ever so many more. The yard is already full, and did you ever see anything quite as ugly as that tall creature? He is a disgrace to any brood. Shall I go and chase him out?"
So she said, putting up her feathers and running at the big duckling, and bit his neck. The duckling gave a loud quack, for it was the first time he had felt any pain, and at this sound his mother quickly turned.
"Leave him alone," she said fiercely, "or I will send for his father. He is not troubling you." "No, but he is so ugly and awkward no one can put up with him," answered the stranger, and though the duckling did not understand the meaning of these words, he felt he was being blamed, and became more uncomfortable till the old Spanish duck who ruled the fowl yard struck in. "It is certainly a great pity that he is so different from these beautiful darlings. If only he could be hatched all over again."
If the poor little fellow drooped his head and did not know where to look, but was comforted when his mother answered,
"He may not be as handsome as the others, but he swims better and is very strong, and I'm sure he will make his way in the world as well as anybody." "Well, you must feel quite at home here," said the old duckling, waddling off.
And so they did, all except the duckling, who was snapped at by everyone since they thought the mother was not looking. Even the turkey cock, who was so big, never passed him without mocking words, and his brothers and sisters, who would not have noticed any difference until it had been put into their heads, soon became as rude and unkind as the rest. At last he could bear it no longer, and one day he fancied he saw signs of his mother turning against him too. So that night, when the ducks and hens were still asleep, he stole away through an open door, and crawled under the burdocks leaves, and scrambled down the bank of the canal, till he reached a wide grassy moor, full of soft marshy places where the reeds grew. Here he lay down, but he was too tired and too frightened to sleep well. Too frightened to fall asleep, and with the earliest peep of the sun, the reeds began to rustle, and he saw that he had blundered into a colony of wild ducks. But as he could not run away again, he stood up and bowed politely.
"You're ugly," said the wild ducks when they had looked him over. "But, however, it is no business of ours unless you wish to marry one of our daughters. That we will not allow."
And the duckling answered that he had no idea of marrying anybody, and wanted nothing but to be left alone after his long journey. So for 2 whole days he lay quietly among the reeds, eating such food as he could find, and drinking the water of the moorland pool, till he felt quite himself strong again. He wished he might stay where he was forever, for he was comfortable and happy, away from everyone, with nobody to bite him and tell him how ugly he was. He was thinking these thoughts when 2 young ganders caught sight of him as they were having their evening splash among the reeds, looking for their supper.
"We are getting tired of this moor," they said. "Tomorrow we are trying another, where the lakes are larger and the feeding better. Will you come with us?" "Is it nicer than this?" asked the duckling doubtfully, and the words were hardly out of his mouth when piff-pah!
The 2 newcomers were stretched dead beside him. At the sound of the gun, the wild ducks in the rushes flew down into the air, and for a few minutes the firing continued. Luckily for himself, the duckling could not fly, and he floundered along through the water till he could hide himself amidst some tall ferns which grew in a hollow. But before he got there, he met a huge creature with 4 legs, which he afterwards knew to be a dog, who stood and gazed at him with a long red tongue hanging out of his mouth. The duckling grew cold with terror, and tried to hide his head beneath his wings, but the dog snuffed at him and passed on, and he was able to reach his place of shelter.
"I'm too ugly for even a dog to eat," he said to himself. "Well, that is a great mercy."
And he curled himself up on the small grass till the shots died away in the distance. When all had been quiet for some time, and there were only stars to see him, he crept out and looked about him. He would never go near a pool again, he thought, and seeing that the moor stretched far away and in opposite directions from which he came, he marched bravely on till he got to a small cottage, which seemed too tumbled down of the stones to hold together any much longer. Even the door only hung on one hinge, and it was only light in the room sprang from a tiny fire. The duckling edged himself in cautiously, and lay down under a chair close to the broken door, from which he could get out if necessary. But no one seemed to notice him or smell him, so he spent the rest of the night in peace. Hey, Nerdy. Thank you for the hydrate. And the stretch. How you doing, Nerdy? I typically do need the self-care because I don't really pay attention, especially when I get into stories. But I'm definitely going to take a break after I finish this one. Long work weeks. I'm just decompressing from editing all day. Of course, I'm going to edit all day tomorrow, but still. I'm not sure how all the captions are working, but at least they're working again. Now, in the cottage dwelt an old woman, her cats, and a hen, and it was really they, and not she, who were the masters of the house. The old woman, who passed all her days in spinning yarn, which she sold at the nearest town, loved both the cat and her hen as her own children, and never contradicted them in any way, so it was at their grace and not hers that the duckling would have to gain. It was only the next morning, when it grew light, that they noticed their visitor, who stood trembling before them, with the eye on the door, ready to escape at any moment. They did not, however, appear very fierce, and the duckling became less afraid as they approached him. "Can you lay eggs?" asked the hen, and the duckling answered meekly, "No, I don't know how." Upon which the hen turned her back, and the cat came forward. "Can you ruffle your fur when you're angry, or purr when you're pleased?" And again the duckling had to admit that he could do nothing but swim, which did not seem of much use to anybody. So the cat and the hen went straight off to the old woman, who was still in bed. "Such a useless creature has taken refuge here," they said. "It calls itself a duckling, but can neither lay eggs nor purr. What had we better do with it?" "Keep it, to be sure," replied the woman briskly. "It is all nonsense about the not laying eggs. Anyway, we will see it stay here for a bit and see what happens." So the duckling remained for 3 weeks, and shared the food of the cat and the hen, but nothing in the way of eggs happened at all. Then the sun came out, and the air grew soft, and the duckling grew tired of being in a hut, and wanted with all his might to have a swim. One morning he got so restless that even his friends noticed it. "What's the matter?" asked the hen, and her duckling told her. I'm longing for the water again. I can't think how delicious it is to put your head under the water and dive straight to the bottom." "I don't think I should enjoy it," said the hen doubtfully, "and I don't think the cat would like it either." And the cat, when asked, agreed there was nothing she would hate so much. "Very well. I can't stay here any longer. I must get to the water," repeated the duck. And the cat and the hen, who felt hurt and offended, answered shortly, "Very well, then go." The duckling would have liked to say goodbye and thank them for their kindness, as he was polite by nature, but they had both turned their backs on him, so he went out of the rickety door feeling rather sad. But in spite of himself, he could not help a thrill of joy when he was out in the air and water once more, and cared little for the rude glances of the creatures he met. For a while he was quite happy and content, but soon the winter came on, and snow began to fall, and everything to grow very wet and uncomfortable. And the duckling soon found that it was one thing to be enjoying the water, and another to like being damp on land. The sun was setting one day, like a great scarlet globe, and the river, to the duck's vast bewilderment, was getting hard and slippery. And when he heard the sound of whirring wings, and high up in the air he saw a flock of swans were flying. They were white as snow which had fallen during the night, and their long necks with yellow bills were stretched southwards, for they were going, that he did not know whether, but to a land where the sun shone all day. Oh, if only he could have gone with them! But that was not possible, of course, and besides, what sort of companion would an ugly thing like him be to those beautiful beings? So he walked sadly down to a sheltered pool, and dived to the very bottom, and tried to think it was the greatest happiness that he could dream of. But all the same, he knew it wasn't. And every morning it grew colder and colder, and the duckling had hard work to keep himself warm. Indeed, it would be truer to say that he was never warm at all, and at last, after one bitter night, his legs moved so slowly that the ice crept closer and closer, and when the morning light broke, he was caught fast, as if in a trap, and soon his senses went from him. A few hours more, and the poor duckling's life would have ended, but, by good fortune, a man was crossing the river on his way to work, and saw the moment where it had happened. He had thick wooden shoes, and he went and stamped hard on the ice so that it broke, and then he picked up the duckling and tucked him under his sheepskin coat, where his frozen bones began to thaw a little. Instead of going to his work, the man turned back and took a bird to his children, who gave him a warm mess to eat and put him in a box by the fire. And when they came back from school, he was so much more comfortable than he had been since he had left the old woman's cottage. They were very kind children, and wanted to play with him, but alas, the poor fellow had never played in his life, and though they wanted to tease him, and flew straight into the milk-pan, and then into the butter dish, and from that into the meal barrel, and at last, terrified at the noise and confusion, right out of the door, and hid himself in the snow amongst the bushes at the back of the house. He never could tell afterwards exactly how they had spent the rest of the winter. He only knew that he was very miserable, and that he had never had enough to eat. But by and by things grew better. The earth became softer, and the sun hotter, and the birds sang, and the flowers were once more appearing on the grass. When he stood up, he felt different somehow from what he had done before he fell asleep on the reeds to which he had wandered after he escaped the peasant's hut. His body seemed larger, and his wings stronger. Something pink looked at him from the side of a hill. He thought he would fly towards it to see what it was. Oh, how glorious it felt to be rushing through the air, wheeling first one way and then the other. He had never thought that flying could be like that. The duckling was almost sorry when he drew near the pink cloud, and found it was made up of apple blossoms growing inside a cottage whose garden ran down the banks of the canal. He fluttered slowly to the ground, and paused for a few minutes under the thicket of singgrass. And while he was gazing about him, there walked slowly past a flock of the same beautiful birds he had seen so many months ago. Fascinated, he watched them one by one step into the canal and float quietly upon the waters as if they were part of them. "I will follow them," said the duckling to himself. "Ugly though I am, I would rather be killed by them than suffer how I have from the cold and hunger, and from the ducks and fowls who should have treated me kindly." And flying quickly down to the water, he swam after them as fast as he could. It did not take him long to reach them, for they had stopped to rest in a green pool shaded by a tree whose branches swept the water. And directly they saw him coming, some of the younger ones swam up to meet him with cries of welcome, which again the duckling hardly understood. He approached them glad, yet trembling, turning to one of the older birds, who by this time had left the shade of the tree, and said, "If I am to die, I should rather you kill me. I don't know why I was ever hatched, for I am too ugly to live." As he spoke, he bowed his head and looked down into the water. Reflecting in the pool, he saw many white shapes, with long necks and golden bills. And without thinking, he looked at the dull gray body and awkward slimy neck. But no such thing was there. Instead, he beheld beneath him a beautiful white swan. "New one is the best of all," said the children as they came down to feed the swans with biscuits and the cake before going to bed. "His feathers are whiter and his beak more golden than the rest." And when he heard that, the duckling thought that it was worth while having undergone all the persecution and loneliness that he had passed through, and as otherwise he would have never known what it was to really be happy. Okay, well, now I've got to take a rest because I've used all 3 of my ad pauses. But I still think it's interesting that this story in particular was mentioned in Dracula. But anyway, I will see you after a few. Okay, I think I'm back, but I am having some technical issues with Twitch. Which, shouldn't surprise anyone. I don't know if it's Twitch or if it's Chrome that's acting up. But I was trying to check to see if my last video had uploaded. And it says it's processing, but it is frozen as far as Twitch goes. But I guess if nothing else, I can cancel and upload it again. But yeah, we're 23 chapters through The Mummy. Which means there's only 9 left because there's 32 chapters, I believe. So, there's that. Oh. So that is what I've been doing Thursday nights. I'm not sure what exactly I'm going to do when I finish The Mummy. Honestly, I don't know if I'd go back to trying to do folklore on Thursdays, or I haven't made up my mind. Because I try to do, I guess, more mature fiction, if that's the way to put it. I've got a Mary Poppins book, except it's the second one. Interesting to say. The second Mary Poppins book. It's like the middle third of the movie. But for now, let's get back to these fairy tales. Oddly enough, this says it's from Thorpe's Yuletide Stories. But I've read this story before, and it didn't have anything to do with Christmas at the time. But just like particular songs from movies about Austrian children and a singing nun, not everything Christmas came from Christmas. So, for the story, we will get into it. As this story is, excuse me, The Two Caskets. Far, far away in the midst of a pine forest, there lived a woman who had both a daughter and a stepdaughter. Ever since her own daughter was born, the mother had given her all that she cried for, so that she grew up to be very cross and disagreeable, as she was ugly. Her stepsister, on the other hand, had spent her childhood in working hard to keep her house for her father, who soon died after this second marriage, and she was very much beloved by the neighbors for her goodness and industry, as she was for her beauty. As the years went on, the difference between the two girls grew more marked, and the old woman treated her stepdaughter worse than ever, and was always on the watch for some pretext for beating her, or depriving her of food. Anything, however foolish, was good enough for this, and one day, when she could think of nothing better, she set both girls to spin while sitting on the low wall of a whale. Wow, I am just screwing up already. Anything, however foolish, was good enough for this, and one day, when she could think of nothing better, she set both the girls to spin while sitting on the low wall of a well. "And you had better mind what you do," she said, "for one of those threads breaks first shall be thrown to the bottom." But of course she took good care that her own daughter's flax was fine and strong, while the stepsister had only coarse stuff, which no one would have thought for using. As might be expected, in a very little while the poor girl's thread snapped, and the old woman, who had been watching from behind the door, seized her stepdaughter and by her shoulders and threw her into the well. "That is the end of you," she said. But she was wrong, for it was only the beginning. Down, down, down went the girl. It seemed as if the well must reach into the very middle of the earth. But at last her feet touched the ground, and she found herself in a field more beautiful than any summer pastures of her native mountains. The trees waved in soft breezes, and flowers of the brightest colors danced in the grass. And though she was quite alone, the girl's heart danced too, for she felt happier than she had ever been since her father had died. So she walked through the meadow till she came to an old tumble-down fence, so old that it was a wonder it managed to stand up at all, and it looked as if it depended for support on the old man's beard that climbed all over it. The girl paused for a moment as she came up, and gazed about for a place she might safely cross. But before she could move, a voice cried from the fence, "Do not hurt me, little maiden, for I am old, and I have not much longer to live." And the maiden answered,
"No, I will not hurt you. Fear nothing."
Then, seeing a spot where the clematis grew thick, and then seeing a spot where the clematis grew less thickly than in other places, she jumped lightly over. "May all go well with thee," said the fence, as the girl walked on. She soon left the meadow and turned into a path which ran between two flowery hedges. Right in front of her stood an oven, and though its open door she could see a pile of white loaves.
"Eat as many loaves as you like, but do not harm me, little maiden,"
cried the oven. And the maiden told her nothing to fear, for she was never hurt anything, and she was grateful for the oven's kindness in giving her such a beautiful white loaf. When she had finished it, down to the last crumb, she shut the oven door and said good morning.
"May all go well with thee,"
said the oven, and the little girl walked on. By and by she became thirsty, and seeing a cow with a milk pail hanging from her horn, turned towards her.
"Milk me and drink as much as you like, little maiden,"
cried the cow.
"but be sure you spill none on the ground, and do me harm, for I have never harmed anyone."
"Nor I," answered the girl. "Fear nothing."
So she sat down and milked till the pail was nearly full. Then she drank it all up, except a little drop at the bottom.
"Now throw any that's left over my hooves, and hang the pail on my horn again,"
said the cow. And the girl did as she was bid, and kissed the cow on her forehead, and went on her way. Many hours now passed since the girl had fallen down the well, and the sun was setting.
"Where shall I spend the night?"
thought she, and suddenly she saw before her a gate, which she had not noticed before, and a very old woman leaning against it.
"Good evening,"
said the girl politely, and the old woman answered,
"Good evening, my child. Would that anyone was as polite as you. Are you in search of anything?" "I am in search of a place,"
replied the girl, and the woman smiled and said,
"Then come a little while and comb my hair, and you shall tell me all the things you can do."
"Willingly, mother," answered the girl. She began combing out the old woman's hair, which was long and white. Half an hour passed in this way, and then the old woman said,
"As you do not think yourself too good to comb me, I will show you where you may take service. Be prudent and patient, and all will go well."
So the girl thanked her, and set out for a farm a little distance, where she was engaged to milk cows and sift the corn. As soon as it was light the next morning, the girl got up and went into the cow-house.
"I'm sure you must be very hungry,"
said she, patting each in turn. Then she fetched hay from the barn, and while they were eating it, she swept out the cow-house, and strewn clean straw upon the floor. The cows were so pleased with the care she took of them that they stood quite still while she milked them, and did not play any tricks on her that they played on the other dairymaids who were rough and rude. And when she had done, and was going to get up from her stool, she found sitting round her a whole circle of cats, black and white, tabby and tortoiseshell, who all cried with one voice, "We're thirsty! Please give us a meal!"
My poor little pussies, she said. Of course you shall have some.
And she went into the dairy, followed by all the cats, and gave each one a little red saucer. Before they drank, they all rubbed themselves against her knees and purred by way of thanks. The next thing the girl had to do was to go to the storehouse and to sift the corn through a sieve. While she was busy rubbing corn, she heard a whir of wings, and a flock of sparrows flew in the window.
"We are hungry! Give us some corn! Give us some corn!"
cried they, and the girl answered,
"You poor little birds! Of course you shall have some."
and scattered a fine handful over the floor. When they had finished, they flew over her shoulders and flapped their wings by way of thanks. Time went by, and no cows in the whole countryside were so fat and well tended as hers, and no dairy milk had been so much milk to show, and the farmer's wife was so well satisfied that she gave her higher wages, and treated her like her own daughter. At length one day the girl was bidden by her mistress to come into the kitchen, and when there the old woman said to her, "I know you can tend cows and keep a dairy. Now let me see what you can do beside. Take the sieve to the well and fill it with water, and bring it home without spilling one drop on the way." The girl's heart sank at this order, for how was it possible for her to do her mistress's bidding? However, she was silent, and taking the sieve, went down to the well with it. Stopping over the side, she filled it to the brim, but as soon as she lifted the water, all ran out the holes. Again and again she tried, but not one drop would remain in the sieve, and she was just turning away in despair when a flock of sparrows flew down from the sky.
"Ashes! Ashes!"
they all cried, and the girl looked at them and said,
"Oh, I can't be any worse plight than I am in already, so I will take your advice."
And she ran back to the kitchen and filled her sieve with ashes, and once more she dipped the sieve into the well, and behold, this time not a drop of water disappeared.
"Here's the sieve, mistress,"
cried the girl, going to the room where the old woman was sitting. "You are cleverer than I expected," said she, "or else someone helped you who is skilled in magic." But the girl kept silent, and the old woman asked her no more questions. Many days passed during which the girl went about her work as usual, but at length one day the old woman called her and said, "I have something more for you to do. There are two yarns, one white and the other black. What you must do is wash them in the river until the black one becomes white and the white black." And the girl took them to the river and washed hard for several hours, but wash as she would, they would not change one bit.
"This is even worse than the sieve,"
she thought, and was about to give up in despair, when through the rush of the wings through the air, and every twig on the birch branches which grew by the bank, was perched a sparrow.
"Go back, black to the east, white to the west,"
they sang all at once, and the girl dried her tears and felt brave again. Picking up the black yarn, she stood facing the east, and dipping it in the river, and in an instant it grew as white as snow. Then turning to the west, she held the white yarn in the water, and it became as black as a crow's wing. She looked back at the sparrows and smiled and nodded to them, and flapping their wings in reply, they swiftly flew away. At the sight of the yard, the old woman was struck dumb, and when at length she found her voice, she asked the girl what magician had helped her to do what no one had done before. But she got no answer, for the maiden was afraid of bringing trouble on her little friends. For many weeks the mistress shut herself up in the room, and the girl went about her work as usual. She hoped that there was an end to the difficult tasks which had been set to her, but in this she was mistaken. For one day the old woman appeared suddenly in the kitchen and said to her, "There is one more trial to which I must put you, and if you do not fail in that, you will be left in peace forevermore. Here are the yarns that you washed. Take them and weave them into a web that is smooth as a king's robe, and see that it is spun by the time the sun sets."
This is the easiest thing I've been set to do, thought the girl, who was a good spinner. But when she began, she found that the skein tangled and broke at every moment. "Oh, I can never do it!" she cried at last, and leaned her head against the loom and wept. But at that instant the door opened, and there entered, one behind another, a procession of cats. "What is the matter, fair maiden?" asked they, and the girl answered, "My mistress has given me this yarn to weave into a piece of cloth, which must be finished by sunset, and I have not yet begun, for the yarn breaks whenever I touch it." "If that is all, dry your eyes," said the cats. "We will manage it for you." And they jumped on the loom, and wove so fast and so skillfully that in a very short time the cloth was ready, and was as fine as any king had ever worn. The girl was so delighted at the sight of it that they gave each cat a kiss on the forehead as they left the room behind, one after the other as they had come. "Who has taught you this wisdom?" asked the old woman, after she had passed her hand twice or thrice over the cloth, and could find no roughness anywhere. But the girl only smiled and did not answer. She had learned the value of silence. For a few weeks the woman sent her maid, and told her that her year of service was now up. She was free to return home, but that for her part the girl had served her so well that she hoped she might stay with her. But at these words the maid shook her head and answered gently, "I have been happy here, madam, and I thank you for your goodness to me, but I have left behind a stepsister and stepmother, and am fain to be with them once more." The old woman looked at her for a moment, and then she said, "Well, that must be as you like, but as you have worked faithfully for me, I will give you a reward. Now go into the loft above the storehouse, and there you will find many caskets. Choose one which pleases you, but be careful not to open it until you have set it in the place you wish it to remain." The girl left the room to go to the loft, and as soon as she got outside she found all the cats waiting for her, walking in procession as was their custom, and they followed her into the loft, which was filled with caskets, big and little, plain and splendid. She lifted one up and looked at it, and then put it down and examined yet a more beautiful one. Which should she choose, the yellow or the blue, the red or the green, the gold or the silver? She hesitated long, and went first to one and then to another, when she heard the cats' voices calling, "Take the black! Take the black!" The words made her look round. She had seen no glass casket, but as the cats continued their cry, she peered into several corners that had remained unnoticed, and at length she discovered a little black box, so small and so black that it might have easily been passed over. "This is a casket that pleases me best, mistress," said the girl, carrying it into the house. The old woman smiled and nodded, and bade her to go her way. So the girl set forth, after bidding farewell to the cows and the cats and the sparrows, who all wept as they said good-bye. She walked on and on till she reached the flowery meadow, and there, suddenly, something happened. She never knew what, but she was sitting on the wall of the well in her stepmother's yard, and then she got up and entered the house. The woman and her daughters stared as if they had been turned to stone, but at length the stepmother gasped, "So you are alive after all? Well, luck is ever against me. And where have you been this past year?" Then the girl told how she had taken service in the underworld, and beside her wages had brought home with her a little casket, which she would like to set up in her room. "Give me the money, and take your ugly little box out of the house," cried the woman, beside herself with rage, and the girl, quite frightened at the violence, hastened away with the precious box clasped to her bosom.
The outhouse was in a very dirty state, as no one had been near it since the girl had fallen down the well, but she scrubbed and swept till everything was clean again. And then she placed the little casket on a small shelf in the corner. "Now I may open it," she said to herself, and unlocking it with a key she hung in the handle. And she raised the lid, but started back as she did, was almost blinded by the light that burst upon her. No one would have ever guessed that the little black box could have held such quantity of beautiful things. Rings, crowns, girdles, necklaces, all made of wonderful stones, and they shone with such brilliance that not only her stepmother and her daughter, but all the people round came running to see if the house was on fire. Of course, the woman felt quite ill with greed and envy, and she would have certainly taken all the jewels for herself, had she not feared the wrath of the neighbors, who loved her stepdaughter more than they hated her. But if she could not steal the casket and its contents for herself, at least she could get another like it, and perhaps a still richer one. So she bade her own daughter sit on the well, and threw her into the water, exactly as she'd done the other girl, and exactly as before, the flower meadow lay at the bottom. Every inch of the way she trod which her stepsister had trodden, she saw things that she had seen, and there the likeness ended. When the fence prayed for her to do no harm, she laughed rudely and tore up some stakes that she might get over more easily. When the oven offered her bread, she scattered the loaves on the ground and stamped on them. And after she had milked the cow and drunk as much as she wanted, she threw the rest on the grass and kicked the pail to bits, and never heard them say, as they looked after her, "You shall not have done this to me for nothing." Towards evening she reached a spot where the old woman was leaning against the gate-post, and passed her without saying a word. "What, you have no manners in your country?" asked the crone. "I can't stop and talk. I'm in a hurry," answered the girl. "It's getting late, and I have to find a place." "Stop and comb my hair for a little," said the old woman, "and I will help you get to a place." "Comb your hair, indeed! I have something better to do than that." And slamming the gate in the crone's face, she went her way. And she never heard the words that followed her. "You shall not have done this to me for nothing." By and by the girl arrived at the farm, and she was engaged to look after the cows and sift the corn, as her stepsister had been. But it was only when someone was watching her that she did her work. At other times, the cow-house was dirty, and the cows ill-fed and beaten so that they kicked over the pail and tried to butter, and everyone said they had never seen such thin cows or such poor milk. As for the cats, she chased them away and ill-treated them so that they would not even spirit to chase the rats and mice, which nowadays ran about everywhere. And when the sparrows came to beg for some corn, they fared no better than the cows or the cats, for the girl threw her shoes at them until they might fly in fright of the woods, and took shelter among the trees. Months passed in this manner, when one day the mistress called to the girl. "All that I have given you, for you have done ill," she said, "yet I will give you another chance. For though you cannot tend cows or divide grain from shafts, there may be other things that you can do better. Therefore take the sieve to the well and fill it with water, and see that you bring it back without spilling a drop." The girl took the sieve and carried it to the well as her sister had, but no little birds came to help her, and after dipping the well 3 times she brought it back empty. "I thought as much," said the old woman angrily. "She is as useless in one thing as she is useless in another." Perhaps the mistress may have thought that the girl had learnt a lesson, but if she did, she was quite mistaken, as the work was no better done than before. By and by she sent for her again, and gave for the maid black and white yarn to wash in the river. But there was no one to tell her the secret by which the black would turn white and the white would turn black, so she brought them back as they were. This time the old woman only looked at her grimly, but the girl was too pleased with herself to care what anyone else thought about her. After some weeks, her 3rd trial came, and the yarn was given to her to spin. as it was given to her stepsister before her. But no procession of cats entered the room to weave a web of fine cloth, and at sunset she had only brought back to her mistress an armful of dirty, tangled wool. "There seems nothing in the world you can do," said the old woman, and she left her to herself. Soon after this the year was up, and the girl went to her mistress to tell her that she wished to go home. "Little desire have I to keep you," answered the old woman. "For one thing you have not done that I ought. Still, I will give you some payment. Therefore go up into the loft and choose for yourself one of the caskets that lies there. But see that you do not open it till you place it where you wish it to stay." This was what the girl had been hoping for, and so rejoiced was she that, without even stopping to thank the old woman, she ran as fast as she could to the loft. There were the caskets, blue and red, green and yellow, silver and gold. In the corner stood a little black casket, just like the one her stepsister had brought home. "If there were so many jewels in that little black thing, this big red one will hold twice as much," she said to herself. And snatching it up, she set off on the road home, without even going to bid farewell to her mistress. If there was "See, mother, what I have brought," said she, as she entered the cottage, holding the casket in both hands. "Ah, you have got something very different from the little black box," answered the old woman with delight. But the girl was so busy finding a place for it to stand that she took little notice of her mother. "It will look best here. No, here," said she, sitting it first on one piece of furniture and then on another. "No, after all, it is fine to live in a kitchen. Let us place it in the guest chamber." So the mother and daughter carried it proudly upstairs and put it on a shelf over the fireplace. Then, untying the key from the handle, they opened the box. As before, a bright light leapt out directly from the lid as raised, but it did not spring from the lustre of jewels, but from hot flames which darted along the walls and burnt up the cottage and all that was in it, and the mother and daughter as well. As they had done when the stepdaughter came home, the neighbors hurried to see what was the matter, but they were all too late. Only the hen house was left standing, and in spite of her riches, there the stepdaughter lived happily to the end of her days. So that is one of the stories that the woman is often related to be Baba Yaga, because that is the kind of thing she would do. Reward the kind and punish the naughty. Or just eat them. Either way, they learned their lesson. Let's see if I can get one or two more stories for the night. Still got half an hour. Well, half an hour of no pre-roll. Messages come in. Then for some reason it started doing me pre-roll anyway, even if I have it turned off. Twitch. What are you going to do? So our next story, The Goldsmith's Fortune. Once upon a time, there was a goldsmith who lived in a certain village where the people were as bad and greedy and covetous as they could possibly be. However, in spite of his surroundings, he was fat and prosperous. He had only one friend whom he liked, and that was a cowherd, who looked after cattle for one of the farmers in the village. Every evening, the goldsmith would walk across to the cowherd's house and say, "Come, let's go for a walk." Now, the cowherd didn't like walking in the evening because, he said, He had been out grazing the cattle all day, and was glad to sit down when night came. But the goldsmith always worried him so that the poor man had to go against his will. This at last so annoyed him that he tried to think of how he could pick a quarrel with the goldsmith so that he would not beg him to walk with him any more. He asked another cowherd for advice, and he said the best thing he could do was to go across and kill the goldsmith's wife, for then the goldsmith would be sure to regard him as an enemy. So, being a foolish person, and there being no laws in the country by which a man should certainly be carried to punishment for such a crime, the cowherd one evening took a big stick and went across to the goldsmith's house when only Mrs. Goldsmith was home, and banged her on the head so hard that she died then and there. When the goldsmith came back and found his wife dead, he said nothing, but just took her outside in the dark lane and propped her up against the wall of his house, and then went to the courtyard and waited. Presently a rich stranger came along the lane, and seeing someone there, as he supposed, he said, "Good evening, friend, and fine night tonight." But the goldsmith's wife said nothing. The man then repeated his words louder, but still there was no reply. Third time he shouted, "Good evening, friend. Are you deaf?" But the figure never replied. Then the stranger, being very angry at what they thought very rude behavior, picked up a big stone and threw it at Mrs. Goldsmith, crying, "That ought to teach you manners!" Instantly, poor Mrs. Goldsmith tumbled over, and the stranger, horrified at seeing what he had done, was immediately seized by the goldsmith, who ran out screaming, "Wretch, you killed my wife! O miserable one, we will have justice done to thee!" With many protestations and reproaches they wrangled together, and the stranger entreating the goldsmith to say nothing, and that he would pay him handsomely as to atone for the sad accident. At last the goldsmith quieted down, and agreed to accept 1,000 pieces from the stranger, who immediately helped him to bury his poor wife, and then rushed off to the guest-house, packed up his things, and was off by daylight, lest the goldsmith should repent and accuse him of the murder of his wife. Now, it very soon appeared that the goldsmith had a lot of extra money, so that people began to ask questions, and finally demanded of him the reason for his sudden wealth. "Oh," he said, "my wife died, and I sold her." "You sold your dead wife?" cried the people. "Yes," said the goldsmith. "For how much?" 1,000 gold pieces," replied the goldsmith. Instantly the villagers went away, and each caught hold of his own wife and throttled her. The next day they went all off to sell their dead wives. Many a weary mile did they tramp, but got nothing but hard words and laughter, or directions to the nearest cemetery, from people whom they offered dead wives for sale. At last they perceived that they had been cheated somehow by the goldsmith, so off they rushed home, and seized the unhappy man, and without listening to his cries and entreaties, hurried him down to the river bank, and flung him in, plop, into the deepest, weediest, and nastiest place they could find. Now, the goldsmith really could not swim. As soon as he was thrown into the deep water, he sank below the surface, so his enemies went away believing that they had seen the last of him. But in reality, he was carried down, half drowned, below the next bend of the river, where he fortunately came across a snag floating in the water. A snag is, a part of a tree or bush that floats very nearly at the surface of the water, and held on to it, and by good luck eventually came ashore some 2 or 3 miles down the river. At the place where he landed, he came across a fine, fat cow buffalo, and immediately he jumped on her back and rode her home. When the village people saw him, they ran out in surprise and said, "Where on earth did you come from, and where did you get that buffalo?" "Ah," said the goldsmith, "you little know the delightful adventures I had. Why, down in that place in the river where you threw me, I found meadows and trees and fine pastures and buffalo and all kinds of cattle. In fact, I could hardly tear myself away, but I thought that I really must let you all know about it." "Oh, thought the greedy village people. "If there are buffaloes, we had best go for the taking after we have some too." Encouraged by the goldsmith, they nearly ran off the next morning to the river, and in order that they might get down quickly to the beautiful place the goldsmith had told them of, they tied great stones to their feet and their necks, and one after another they jumped into the water as fast as they could, and were drowned. And whenever any one of them waved his hands or struggled, the goldsmith would cry out, "Look, he's beckoning the rest of you! Come, he's got a fine buffalo!" The others, who were doubtful, would jump in, until not one was left. Then the cunning goldsmith went back and took all the village for himself, and became very rich indeed. But do you think he was happy? Not a bit. Lies never made a man happy yet. Truly, he got the better of a set of wicked and greedy people, but only by being wicked and greedy himself. And as it turned out, when he got so rich, he got very fat, and at last he was so fat that he couldn't move, and one day he got an apoplexy and died, and no one in the world cared the least bit. So that version is about a blacksmith. Another version is about a tailor. But they kind of do the same thing. The tailor did a lot more, though. But, a goldsmith without customers wouldn't do very well. He'd have to change towns. Anyway, this is another one that says it's Yuletide. I'm kind of curious what it goes. So our next tale for this fabulous Friday night of fairy tales. The Enchanted Wreath. Once upon a time there lived near a forest a man and his wife and two girls. One girl was the daughter of the man, the other the daughter of his wife. The man's daughter was good and beautiful, but the woman's daughter was cross and ugly. However, her mother did not know that, and thought her the most bewitching maiden that ever was seen. One day the man called to his daughter and bade her to come with him into the forest to cut wood. They worked all day, but in spite of the chopping, they were very cold, for it rained heavily, and when they returned home, they were wet through and through. Then, to his vexation, the man found that he had left his axe behind him, and knew that if it was to lay all night, it would become rusty and useless. So he said to his wife, "I have dropped my axe in the forest. Bid your daughter go and fetch it, for mine has worked hard all day, and is both wet and hungry." But the wife answered, "If your daughter is wet already, then it's all the more reason that she should go and get the axe. Besides, she is a great strong girl, and a little rain would not hurt her, while my daughter would be sure to catch a bad cold." By long experience, the man knew there was no good saying any more, and with a sigh he told the poor girl she must return to the forest for the axe. The walk took some time, for it was very dark, and her shoes often stuck in the mud, but she was brave as well as beautiful, and never thought of turning back merely because the path was both difficult and unpleasant. At last, with her dress torn by brambles that she could not see, and her face scratched by twigs on the trees, she reached the spot where she and her father had been cutting in the morning, and found the axe in the place that he had left it. To her surprise, 3 little doves were sitting on the handle, all of them looking very sad. "You poor little things," said the girl, stroking them. "Why do you sit there and get wet? Go and fly home to your nest. It will be much warmer than this. But first, eat this bread which I saved for my dinner, and perhaps you will feel happier. It is my father's axe you are sitting on, and I must take it back as fast as I can, or I shall get a terrible scolding from my stepmother." Then she crumbled the bread on the ground, and was pleased to see the doves fluttering quite cheerfully towards it. "Goodbye," she said, picking up the axe, and went on her way homeward. By the time they finished all the crumbs, the doves felt much better, and they were able to fly back to their nests at the top of the tree. "That was a good girl," said one. "I really was too weak to stretch out my wings before she came. I should like to do something to show her how grateful I am." "Let us give her a wreath of flowers that will never fade as long as she wears it," cried another. "Let the tiniest singing birds in the world sit among the flowers, or joined by a third." No. rejoined the third.
Yes, that will do beautifully,
Said the first. And when the girl stepped into her cottage, a wreath of rosebuds was on her head, and a crowd of little birds were singing unseen. The father, who was sitting by the fire, thought that, in spite of her muddy clothes, he had never seen his daughter looking so lovely. But the stepmother and the other girl grew wild with envy.
How absurd it is to walk in the pouring night dressed up like that,
She remarked crossly, and roughly pulled the wreath from her as she spoke, and placed it on her own daughter. As she did so, the roses became withered and brown, and the birds flew out of the window.
See what a trumpery thing it is,
Cried the stepmother.
and now take your supper and go to bed, for it is near upon midnight.
But though she pretended to despise the wreath, she longs none the less for her daughter to have one like it. Now it happened the next evening the father, who had been alone in the forest, came back a second time without his axe. The stepmother's heart was glad when she saw this, and she said quite mildly,
Why haven't you forgotten your axe again, you careless man? But now your daughter shall stay home, and mine shall go and bring it back.
and throwing a cloak over her daughter's shoulders, she bade her hasten to the forest. With a very ill grace the damsel set forth, grumbling to herself as she went. Though she wished for the wreath, she did not want all the trouble of getting it. By the time she reached the spot where her stepfather had been cutting the wood, the girl was in a very bad temper indeed, and when she caught sight of the axe, there were 3 little doves, with drooping heads and soiled, bedraggled feathers, sitting on the handle.
You dirty creatures, she cried, get away at once, or I will throw stones at you.
And the doves spread their wings in a fright and flew up to the very top of the tree, their bodies shaking with anger.
What shall we do to revenge ourselves on her?
Asked the smallest of the doves.
We were never treated like that before. Never,
cried the biggest dove.
We must find some way of paying her back in her own coin. I know,
answered the middle dove.
She shall never be able to say anything but dirty creatures to the end of her life. Oh, how clever of you! That will do beautifully,
exclaimed the other 2, and they flapped their wings and clucked so loud with delight, and made such a noise, that they woke up all the birds in the trees close by.
What in the world is the matter?
asked the bird sleepily.
That is our secret,
said the doves. Meanwhile, the girl had reached home, crosser than ever, but as soon as her mother heard her lift the latch of the door, she ran out to hear her adventures.
Well, did you get the wreath?
She cried.
Dirty creatures!
Don't speak to me like that! What do you mean? asked the mother again.
Dirty creatures!
Repeated the daughter, and nothing else could she say. Then the woman saw that something evil had befallen her, and turned in rage to her stepdaughter.
You are at the bottom of this, I know,
she cried, and as the father was out of the way, she took a stick and beat the girl till she screamed with pain, and went to bed sobbing. If the poor girl's life had been miserable before, it was 10 times worse now, for the moment her father's back was turned, the others teased and tormented her from morning till night, and their fury was increased by the sight of her wreath, which the doves had placed again on her head. Things went on like this for some weeks, when one day, as the king's son was riding through the forest, he heard some strange birds singing more sweetly than birds he had ever heard sing before. He tied his horse to a tree and followed where the sound led him, and to his surprise he saw before him a beautiful girl chopping wood with a wreath of pink rosebuds, out of which some singing came. Standing in the shelter of a tree, he watched her a long while, and then, hat in hand, he went up and spoke to her. "Fair maiden, who are you, and who gave you that wreath of singing roses?" asked he, for the birds were so tiny that, until you looked closely, you never saw them.
I live on the edge of a hut. I live in a hut at the edge of the forest,
she asked, blushing, for she had never spoken to a prince before.
As to the wreath, I know not how it came there, unless it may be a gift of some doves who I fed when they were starving.
The prince was delighted with this answer, which showed the goodness of the girl's heart. And besides, he had fallen in love with her beauty, and would not be content till she promised to return with him to the palace, and to become his bride. The old king was naturally disappointed at his son's choice of a wife, as he wished him to marry a neighboring princess. But as from his birth the prince had done exactly as he liked, and nothing was said, and a splendid wedding feast was already ready. The day after her marriage, the bride sent a messenger bearing handsome presents to her father, and telling him of the good fortune which had befallen her. As may be imagined, the stepmother and her daughter were so filled with envy that they grew quite ill, and had to take to their beds, and nobody would have been sorry for it had they ever gotten up again. But that did not happen. At length, however, they began to feel better, for the mother invented a plan by which she could revenge on the girl who had never done her any harm. Her plan was this. In the town where she had lived before she was married, there was an old witch who had more skill with magic than any witch she knew. To this witch she would go and beg her to make her a mask for the face of her stepdaughter, and when she had the mask, the rest would be easy. She told her daughter what she meant to do. Although her daughter could only say dirty creatures in answer, she nodded and smiled and looked well pleased. Everything fell out exactly as the woman had hoped. By the aid of her magic mirror, the witch beheld the new princess walking in her gardens in a dress of green silk, and in a few minutes had produced a mask so like her that very few people could have told the difference. However, she counseled the woman that when her daughter wore it, for that, of course, was what she intended to do, she had better pretend that she had a toothache, and cover her head with a lace veil. The woman thanked her and paid her well, and returned to her hut carrying the mask under her cloak. In a few days she heard that a great hunt was planned, and that the prince would leave the palace very early in the morning, so that his wife would be alone all day. This was a chance not to be missed, and taking her daughter with her, she went up to the palace, where she had never seen before. The princess was too happy in her new home to remember that she had suffered all the old one, and she welcomed them both gladly, and gave them quantities of beautiful things to take back with them. At last she took them down to the shore to see a pleasure boat which her husband had made for her, and here the woman, seizing the opportunity, stole softly behind the girl and pushed her off the rock on which she was standing into the deep water, where she instantly sank to the bottom. Then she fastened the mask on her daughter and flung over her shoulders a velvet cloak, which the princess had let fall, and finally arranged the lace veil over her head. "Rest your cheek in your hand, as if you are in pain, and when the prince returns," said the mother, "be careful not to speak, whatever you do. I will be back to the witch and see if I cannot take off the spell laid to you by those horrible birds. Why did I not think of it before?" No sooner had the prince entered the palace than he hastened to the princess's apartment, where he found her lying on the sofa, apparently in great pain. "My dearest wife, what the matter is wrong with you?" he cried, kneeling down beside her and trying to take her hand, but she snatched it away and pointed to her cheek and murmured something he could not catch. "What is it? Tell me, is it pain bad? When did it begin? Shall I send for your ladies to bathe the place?" asked the prince, pouring out these and a dozen other questions, to which the girl only shook her head. "But I can't leave you like this," he continued, starting up. "I must summon all the court physicians and apply soothing balms to the sore place." As he spoke, he sprang to his feet to go in search for them. This so frightened his pretended wife, who knew if that a great physician came near her, the trick would at once be discovered, that she forgot her mother's counsel not to speak, and forgot even the spell that had been laid upon her, and catching hold of the prince's tunic, she cried in tones of entreaty, "Dirty creatures!" The young man stopped, not able to believe his ears, but supposed the pain had made the princess cross, as it sometimes does. However, he had guessed somehow that she wished to be left alone, so he only said, "Well, I They say a little sleep will do you good, if you can manage to get it, and that you will wake up better tomorrow. Now, that night happened to be very hot and airless, and the prince, after vainly trying to rest, at length got up and went to the window. Suddenly he beheld in the moonlight a form with a wreath of roses on her head rise out of the sea below him, and wash and step up on the sands, holding out her arms as she did so towards the palace. That maiden is strangely like my wife, he thought. I must see her closer. And he hastened down to the water. But when he got there, the princess, for she was indeed it, had disappeared completely, and he began to wonder if his eyes had not deceived him. The next morning he went to the false bride's room, but the ladies told him she would neither speak nor get up, though she ate everything they set before her. The prince was sorely perplexed as to what could be the matter with her, for naturally he could not guess that she was expecting her mother to return at every moment to remove the spell the doves had laid upon her, and meanwhile was afraid to speak lest she should betray herself. At length he made up his mind to summon all the court physicians. He did not tell her what he was doing, lest it should make her worse, but he went himself and begged the 4 learned leeches attached to the king's person to follow him to the princess's apartments. Unfortunately, as they entered, the princess was so enraged at the sight of them that she forgot all about the doves and shrieked out, "Dirty creatures! Dirty creatures!" which so offended the physicians that they left the room at once, and nothing that the prince could say would prevail on them to remain. He then tried to persuade his wife to send them a message that she was sorry for her rudeness, but not a word would she say. Late evening, when he had performed all of the tiresome duties which fall on the very lot of every prince, the young man was leaning out of his window, refreshing himself with the cool breezes that blew off the sea. His thoughts went back to the scene of the morning, and he wondered if, after all, he had not made a great mistake in marrying a low-born wife, however beautiful she might be. He could have imagined that the quiet, gentle girl who had been so charming a companion to him the first few days of their marriage could have become, in a day, a rude, sulky woman who would not control her temper even to benefit herself. One thing was clear. If she did not change her conduct very shortly, he would have to send her away from court. He was thinking of these thoughts when his eyes fell on the sea beneath him, and there, as before, was a figure that so closely resembled his wife, standing with her feet in the water and holding out her arms to him. "Wait for me! Wait for me! Wait for me!" he cried, not even knowing he was speaking, and when he reached the shore, there was nothing to see but the shadows cast by the moonlight. The state ceremonial in a city some distance off caused the prince to ride at daybreak, and he left without seeing his wife again. "Perhaps she may come to her senses by tomorrow," he said to himself. "And anyhow, if I'm going to send her back to her father, it might be better if we did not meet in the meantime." Then he put the matter out of his mind, and kept his thoughts on the duty that lay before him. It was nearly midnight before he returned to the palace, but instead of entering, he went down to the shore and hid behind a rock. He had scarcely done so when the girl came out of the sea and stretched out her arms towards his window. In an instant the prince had seized her by the hand, and though she had made a frightened struggle to reach the water, for she had in turn had the spell laid on her, he held her fast. "You are my wife, and I shall never let you go," he said. The words were hardly out of his mouth when he found that it was a hare that he was holding on by the paw. Then the hare changed into a fish, and the fish into a bird, and the bird into a slimy, wriggling snake. This time the prince's hand nearly opened itself, but with a strong effort he kept his fingers shut, and drawing his sword, cut off its head. And the spell was broken, and the girl stood before him as he had first seen her, the wreath upon her head, and the birds singing for joy. The next morning the stepmother arrived at the palace with an ointment that the old witch had given her to place on her daughter's tongue, which would break the dove's spell, if the rightful bride was really been drowned at sea. If not, it would be useless. The mother assured her that she had seen her stepdaughter sink, and that no fear would ever come up again. But to make herself quite safe, the old woman might bewitch the girl, and so she did. After that, the wicked stepmother traveled through the night to get to the palace as soon as possible, and made her straight away to the daughter's room. "I've got it! I've got it!" she cried triumphantly, and laid the ointment on her daughter's tongue. "Now, what do you say?" she said proudly. "Dirty creatures! Dirty creatures!" answered the daughter, and the mother wrung her hands and wept, as she knew that all her plans had failed. At this moment the prince entered with his real wife. "You both deserve death," he said, "and if it were left to me, you should have it. But the princesses begged me to spare your lives, so you will be put on a ship and carried off to a desert island, where you will stay till you die." Then a ship was made ready, and the wicked woman and her daughter were placed on it, and it sailed away, and no more was heard of them. But the prince and his wife lived together long and happily, and ruled their people well. Yay, made it before the last break. Ouch. How many stories was that? Can't count. I don't have any way to stop the ad break, which is going to hit in 3.5 minutes. But let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we got 6 stories. Same as last week. So, I will try to get those stories edited and put where they belong. In the meantime, Amazon Week in Raid. Oh, excuse me. What is this, Rolex? Wait, that's the Panda, I think? I don't know. Oh, let's see. I see Dusk is on doing the art stuff. Does Dusk be artin'? So, what do you say? Well, no, wait. How about some Japanese stories that you repay a raid? Well, help another reader anyway. So we're going to raid a mostly harmless obelisk. So there be your answers. Let's see if I spelled this right. Cool. I did. I'm impressed with myself, which doesn't happen often enough. So, I will see you, I guess, now, Monday, for more Baldur's Gate. See you around.
In the hollow of the night, shadows weave and twist. The wolf has told his stories, wrapped in mystic mist, lurking in the silence where the echoes softly play, the echoes of forgotten tales dimming as they sway. The hours drip like candle wax, slowly melting gold. Lands of frost and twilight, secrets yet untold. The forest breathes a shiver, its ancient heartbeats thrum. Underneath the silver glow, the wild whispers come. Time to close the book.